All right. So here we are, yet another week, and I find myself in a similar situation to one that was experienced in earlier. In that I find myself without a co-host. Isaac is not available to do the episode this week, but never fear. I learned my mistakes from the last one, and I know for a fact that it would be better for all of us if I kept this as short and as simple as possible. With that in mind, I welcome you to another week of background noise, and this week, I guess I'm watching Steamboat Bill Jr., a movie which is terribly short for a feature-length film. It's only an hour and 5 minutes. And it's a Buster Keaton film, honestly one of his best of his late period silent films, which is kind of a mouther there. But I find myself this week, well, I'm watching it, first of all, because it's just a great movie to watch, but second of all, because, again, it's short. And one thing I learned from doing The Shining by myself, that was a nearly 3-hour film, is that I can go on for maybe like 30, 40 minutes before I ran out of energy. And I was doing that for like 2.5 hours, so mistakes shall be rectified tonight. But don't worry, because I actually have things I want to talk about, regardless of Isaac's presence. Although first I want to bring up the Isaac situation, just because I feel like it's going to be a detriment going forward. This will not be the last time, as it has not been the first time either, that I will be without a co-host. And I remember doing this today, preparing to do this episode. I'm thinking, God, every week it's the same now, where I'm not sure if it's going to happen. And every week when it does happen, it's like a grace, the grace of God, by the grace of God that it's pulled off. It's not that it requires a lot of technical skill to pull this off, considering that the quality is not that high to begin with, but all the same, it's amazing how easily this could all just fall apart. And on again, this is recorded the same day it's coming out. This will be uploaded within a couple hours after I'm done here recording it. And all I can think is, every time I usually the process, if you want to know the behind the scenes of it, is that there isn't much behind the scenes, to be honest, but it usually boils down to on the Sunday. So the Sunday prior to us recording on a Monday, so the day before, I'll text Isaac and make sure, are we still on? Are we still going to do this thing? And he never responds on Sunday. He always responds on Monday, so it's always a gamble there. It's a crapshoot if I'm going to know at all, really. Because Isaac has one of those peculiarly lovely habits of never responding to other people's calls. It really makes for a loving and wonderful friendship. But, so I think, well, this changes everything. I won't be able to do it with him, so I should keep it short and scratch whatever we were going to talk about and just talk about something different. So that's what's happening. And the only thing I think of is also, the microphone that we used for episode 3, which is, as far as you all know, is the best episode recorded so far, as far as I'm concerned. And the microphone just helped to increase the quality of the audio, which in a podcast is kind of the most important thing. So I'm making a list in my head of things in ways that Isaac disappoints me. And the list is mounting, let me tell you. He's not a good co-host because he's not on every week. And can't even get a microphone out of him. And then whenever I try to film something with him, he's unavailable. Not very enthusiastic about it either. Moral of the story is I should get better friends, I guess. It's in moments like this that I think, Tommy Mitchell, why are you not in Chicago? I could really use you right about now. I bring up Tommy Mitchell not just because he's definitely going to be listening to this, but also because It's impossible for me to avoid talking about him because I guess it's there's a word for that. I forget what it's called when once something is on your mind, you see it everywhere, and it's impossible to avoid it. A case in point, I've been reading A Life by Elia Kazan. It's the autobiography of Elia Kazan, the director. I've been reading this for quite some time now, quite a few weeks. It's a really dense book, so it's not something I can just pick up lightly and just breeze through. It's dense, it's long, it's written in a prose that's not the most exciting, so it could be a drag sometimes to read. But I was reading it, and at one point he brings up the fact that his first wife, Molly, her relatives are a really big family on the East Coast. They're really important. And she is related to the man who helped create the Cincinnati Zoo. And I hear this, and I think, oh, I can't, not even in a book on Kazan can I avoid Tommy Mitchell. It's amazing. It's really quite frustrating. Another reason why the book made me think of Tommy is because, especially near the end of the film, or the book, I should say, Elia Kazan brings up a director whom I know Tommy Mitchell is a great admirer of. Someone who I identify with Tommy Mitchell, in fact, Nicholas Ray. He talks about him a bit in depth near the end of the book. And I want to read that passage, or the two passages right now. A, because it's a good way to kill time, but also because I think it is actually... It's something that's been on my mind as of late, as this whole last section of the book, of the Kazan book. But we'll talk about that more once I'm done reading this excerpt. But it's a very morbid final series of chapters in this book. So, here I go. When I heard that film director Nick Ray was in Sloan Kettering, a hospital specializing in cancer cases, I paid him a visit. We greeted each other affectionately. We were old friends. I was shocked at his appearance, and we talked about old times. It was evident that his time was running out. He had no illusions about his condition, told me straight that the cancer was spreading rapidly through his body. When I left, I told him I'd be back. And I remember how he nodded. His mind, I thought, had fluttered here and there, and he was altogether uncertain. I returned 2 days later, feeling that I might be seeing him for the last time. He wasn't in his room, so I went to the nurse's station and asked about him. The nurse told me that Nick had been taken for radiation treatment and pointed down a long hall. It might be Nick, and walked to meet him, or to meet it. I didn't recognize him immediately, then I thought, target mark indicating where the X-ray should be aimed. I made the only possible assumption that the cancer had moved to as usual. Not unfriendly, but distracted. I walked along at the side of the chair, asking a few questions. Appointment. When we got to his room, Nick greeted someone, calling him Vim. I saw two men. I got the idea. Nick was being photographed for a film, as he was dying. Vendors, a German. Clearly they wanted me to leave so they could get on with their work. Nick threw me preparing to play his most important scene. I thought about what was going on and found it grotesque. A man cooperated. I thought more about what I'd seen. I thought vendors ghoulish, but I also thought that this might make that his last act on Earth. What kind of man would do that? Nick was just one man, but had been many different men at different times, matching where he was and whom kind of actor and director. To be a tough guy when you're with tough guys, a poet when you're with poets, love when you're with a woman. It was an aspect of the Stanislavski system in which Nick longed to be them all and all at the same time. That was the complete actor. I knew this from myself, with a class war, a master of the technique of acting, with his differences from Lee Strasberg, an original father, nevertheless out to top every girl who aroused his fancy, to have it all, be distant to the left yet submissive to the right, always rebellious, finally uncontrollable. I asked to experience every experience, even death, to know it initially, to taste it all, and enjoy. At this point, I must just say, I'm sure Tommy would say, "No, you're not, Ilya. No, you're not." But anyway, but he went all the way, and I did not. I was more disciplined, more an artist, more of a gambler. But hadn't it been Man's deepest desire all through history to have it all, only to actors and directors? Hell no. Is it specifically American? No. Want. I recalled that Nick had always created an image of what he wanted to be perceived as. But it directed my first play for the Theater of Action. He'd been a member of the cast. As the war was my assistant. He was studying filmmaking technique and learning fast. Jack Houseman gave him his first. Nick had a unique talent for directing actors. His career went forward with a rush. He became a Hollywood. He'd made Rebel Without a Cause with Jimmy Dean right after I'd made East of Eden. His film became a mind thought, and I was glad to see him so successful. He went on to make other films in Hollywood that were highly praised, and very few can survive a period of no financial returns, as I knew very well. Time in Europe, so I stopped seeing him. Knew about him only through gossip. I heard he was back in California, but was not doing well. I knew he'd taken $1,000 and had exhausted the patience even of people close to him. I loaned him money, which I did not. Greenberg. I've got to get him out of my house, Greenberg said. He's driving me up the wall. Now where there will be coke, so he can get some free. Gene Kelly bought him a suit. While Nick... But nothing disturbed the affection I felt for Nick. I even wondered, when my living as an artist should. The very first time I heard that he was in a hospital and that the trouble was cancer, I went perfectly well. There was another man in the room, but he remained quiet as Nick and I talked. We embraced his medical condition. He peeled off his pajama top, turned his back, and exhibited a long red scar, saying that the cancer was beyond control, encircling the aorta and invading a lung, so they'd closed the air, found a cigarette, and lit it. I wondered if he was doing that for my benefit or for his own. The fellow in the room explained why he was there. He was from a college and offering Nick a job lecturing on film. And a favor to even consider his offer, which I suppose he was. He took a job in Washington. I don't know how to pronounce that. Anyway, wearing a black white artist to the students there, a hero. He made a film with them rather than lecturing for them to take notes. Assuming he's referring to We Can't Go Home Again, which is actually my favorite Nicholas Ray film. Much of it was impressions. I later saw some of the footage, and Nick looked bad, but his spirit was fed by the adoration of the students. I was thinking about this part of the book. I obtained a copy of the film Vin Vendors made of Nick's death, but then came an extraordinary long close-up of Nick near the end. The dying director, who knows... Nick looked unbelievably exhausted. There could be no doubt that he had only a few days to live. Exactly what he wanted to do. And to my surprise, the same belligerence I remember on John Steinbeck's face as what he wants calls out, cut. But sometimes when the scene is going surprisingly well and is providing to continue past where he'd rehearsed it, Nick Ray was directing his own last close-up. Cut. Then a pause and again, cut. Then don't cut. When Nick was calling, he lived his life. On film. Nick didn't want to die. He wanted to go on. Even in his last terrible misery, he clung to every foot of life. The film, but I call it heroic. In a way, I thought he was speaking for all artists. Vendors was concerned about this too, and possibly to save himself from such an accusation. When I saw the film, I thought his decision to continue was justified. I admired him, with all its brain, and beyond that, to a human being's dogged determination to die as himself. Which has to say about anyone. Elia Kazan mentions many people in this book. Positively in this book. He has bad experiences with every good person in his life, but if there's one person to just have nothing but admiration for, it is Nicholas Ray. And with that in mind, I would like to read very close at the end. It's in the last chapter. In this, to put it in context, John and Harold Clurman is dead, and John Steinbeck has died, and all the people. He brings up Nick Ray again after talking about all these other people and their deaths. Nick Ray, his brain, was a proud man too. He'd become demoralized by a series of... Like many others, he'd resorted to drugs, then failed even more miserably with straits, knowing he was soon to die, proud to a degree that made it impossible for him to back off. Since that was the only drama left in his life, he put it on film. There he died as himself. That's what he has to say about Nick Ray, for the most part. But anyway, this book that I've just finished, it starts off in the beginning with Kazan's family, and then ends with, in the very end, he at least found some comfort. I don't know exactly when this, maybe 10 years at least, before he died. Considering that it was in 1999, I think, that he... in that infamous Academy Award ceremony where A lot of the people remember the House on Un-American Activities Committee. People in Hollywood who had a problem with Kazan just ratting people out than they ever had with Weinstein. So I guess whatever you think of the man, and let me tell you, he reading this book, you're bound to, is so candidly honest. You can't help but realize, oh, this guy is an asshole. At least look at Kazan and say, oh, this is a complex individual. Interesting because it basically is just him talking about all the people in his life who are important to him and how he's outlived them all. That's probably one of the great problems with biographies, is that since they all end the same way, it's hard to end on an. This is why I love the Sam Peckinpah book, Going Crazy with Sam and All His Friends. Because in a weird way, he died before his time and all that, there's something really positive in the way. Just read that book. It's a weird thing to say, but it's true. But not interested in movies, just wanting to read this book. Again, it's dense, it's long, it's over, but it certainly was. And I guess for anyone who's interested in cinema, it would be a book worth reading. Although I will say this, going into it, I thought I was going to read Kazan, who at one point in his life was a director. That's the way to characterize what I just read. So I know more about Kazan, I think, than I want to know. I feel like I've such the books you've read. Certainly not this one, at least. But anyway, other things, more important things. Well, presumably more important things, such as a book where he interviews just about every single great director in Hollywood, minus a few exceptions, who have. Speaking of Bogdanovich, I just recently saw, and well, I guess where I am reconsidering Bogdanovich as a director. Earlier in my life, when I hated Bogdanovich, well, I hated him for two reasons. Also because the films I had seen by him I thought were crap. As well as Mask. And which really, his director's cut, the only difference is that there's Bruce Springsteen music. But it's actually it's like, oh wow, this feels more correct. It's almost like this was shot for so that one, that's the reason for that one. But The Last Picture Show is just, for some reason, a couple times now, and every time I watch it, I think, ugh, this is not good. This is not enjoyable in the slide. Most of them, I can say. And for these are actually really nice films. What's Up, Doc? Paper Moon, Targets. Both films which were, when they were presented for the first time theatrically, were not shown in the way he wanted to, but Second Life, as it were, and all these films are actually really pretty, and it's kind of an interesting movie in that there's no plot really. These people sleeping with each other. It really is like an hour and a half of people sleeping with each other. Like, I guess like a Lubitsch comedy in many ways, or like a screwball comedy, but without a plot. I guess that's a good way of thinking about it. And a lot of sex. It's got a good cast. You got people like John Ritter and Ben Gazzara and Audrey Hepburn. She just stopped being in movies after a certain point in her life, and this is one of those rare ones. The last theatrical film she did where she actually had a major role in the film, like a leading role, was Always, the Spielberg film, which most people hate, but I actually love. So I was watching it, and it's mostly, for anyone who hasn't seen it, really is just mostly a lot of country music in this movie, which was also surprising. I thought, we're in New York. More interesting than the movie itself, most people like to talk about the Dorothy Stratton and how they fell in love. She falls in love with John Ritter, who basically is Bogdanovich's surrogate in the film. He put her in the film, and she was going to leave her husband of the time because she was married to be with Bogdanovich. So it was a murder, it was a homicide, suicide kind of situation. The whole ordeal. Understandably, and testament to the memory of Dorothy Stratton. Although he would then proceed to kind of, which is less of a book and more just Peter Bogdanovich, just kind of anger inside of him on paper and putting it in a published format. It's affected the rest of his life. The rest of his career has been affected by and the rest of his film career. The movies he's made since They All Laughed are just different. In a movie before this, you would have something like What's Up, Doc, where there's just a lighthearted mood to the whole, kind of optimistic in a way. whether or not he intended it to be. But when you look up at the films, The Cat's Meow, or something like A Thing Called Love, Texasville, a very good example. There's actually a really large. Although he would eventually go on to marry Dorothy Stratton's. Funny enough, in a movie that I really do like by him called Illegally Yours, where LB was on that film that they would eventually marry. Not fall in love, get married, and they stayed married up until 2014. So it was like a good that they were together. Really, when you think about it, that's kind of amazing. But they fell in love for various reasons, and it's amazing how Bogdanovich any of his movies. But that's really they all laugh. Pure Bogdanovich film. It's the last film of an era. Many people say that that's the film of New Hollywood. And it would make sense if it was released in '80. So I've become obsessed lately with Bogdanovich, and so now my next book I'm reading is Who with Orson Welles. So that'll be interesting. And yeah, that's Peter Bogdanovich, I guess. I don't know what came over me to. It's just something I'm going through right now. It's kind of amazing when I'm thinking about it right. And so it's amazing how I struggle to come up with things to say and ramble on for hours without stopping. There's something, I guess it's the same thing how some people are there's something about this that makes me think harder and makes it harder for me to deal with. Again, presumably mostly Isaac's fault since he's not here, but we're already just about more than halfway through the film, and this is the part where Buster Keaton, in one of those great visual gags of his, he's trying to cross one boat to the other, and while at the same time not alerting his parentage to get to see the girl who's kind of the daughter of his arch enemy. It's a really funny film. Actually, I remember the last time I saw this film was with Isaac, and it was a night where Isaac just called me up. Speaking of Isaac, it was a night where he called me up and said, "Hey, Fabricio, I have nowhere to go. Do you want to hang out?" I was already, and then we hung out, and eventually we, after going to an IHOP, which just seems to be a thing we do, came back to my place, and we watched a series of Steamboat Bill Jr., which was well received by its audience, just being me and Isaac. We laughed. Alan once said it, and I think it's very true, that silent days, they're pretty much the peak of comedy, in film at least, is silent. I look at this movie and I think, yeah, that's pretty much true, because you watch it and you don't really need to get what's going on. I mean, you get what's going on, but you don't need to be informed about what's going on, which is what you get in sound pictures, where every now and then people will talk and then you get information that way. But in this film and in all the silent films, you don't get information that way. You get, obviously you have those text cards, which Buster Keaton always prided himself on using a very small amount of those relative to other silent films. But all the information is received kind of just visually, or most of it. The jokes are, and the story is, and obviously with all these movies, the story has to be kept as simple as possible so that you can tell it. Almost all of these movies have the exact same plot, which is that Buster Keaton's character is in love with a girl, and he goes through a lot of trouble to try and be with the girl. In this film, it's the same thing, but also he's trying to be with the girl and at the same time trying to please his dad. So it's a little bit more complex, but only a little bit. There he goes, diving into the pool, into the lake, I guess is what it would be, or it's more like a river. Anyway, actually, it's funny that I'm thinking about this now. The things that we watched that night, Isaac and I watched this movie. The short features, the short presentation I'm talking about, were episodes of the Jackie Chan Adventures. That's right, you heard that correctly, which is actually a much better show than I remembered. I watched that as a kid, and I recently got a hold of it again to rewatch them because I thought, relive some childhood nostalgia. What's wrong with that? In small doses, anything is fine. And I started watching it, and then after about 5 episodes, I realized, oh, this is really very good. It's not just that it's a fun cartoon. This is actually just a really entertaining show where a fictional version of Jackie Chan is basically an Indiana Jones, but with more comedic relief. And it works so well. And but the highlight of every episode, of course, is it ends and you actually get the real life Jackie Chan answering a question from his fans, and sometimes, and usually they're very simple questions like, "What's your favorite color? What do you like to eat?" or "How do you stay in shape?" But every answer he gives, no matter how simple, is so enthusiastic. It's like he's so happy to just be there. Jackie Chan is just so happy, and that's the great thing about Jackie Chan. Generally, he just always seems like he's so happy to just be around, to do things. And at one point, one of the episodes, they talk about how one of the question of the week of the episode was, Jackie, do you have any role models? Who are your role models? And he says, oh, in my life, I have many role models. Growing up, the teachers, they teach me a lot. And, the great role model in my life. Also, when I'm older, I tried to be a movie star. I look at films like Bruce Lee, Buster Keaton. I say, oh, that is impressive. I want to be just like that. So many role models in my life. So obviously he looked up to Buster Keaton, at least when he got older. And he was trying to model himself after certain kinds of movies. Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, Harold Lloyd, those guys became his inspirations in terms of the visual comedy. And it shows in his movies too. Even though his films are sound films, I would argue that they are the best silent pictures ever made with sound. Because, again, with most of his movies, the plots, again, are a little bit more complicated in his movies just because they can afford to be. But for the most part, they're always very simple in the sense that Jackie Chan is a guy who, no matter where he is in his life, he's trying to overcome some obstacle, there's like a villain that he's like trying to beat, he's like trying to get, and he has to find new ways, he has to constantly overcome the odds to beat him. It's the same story over and over again, but it works every time. And Jackie Chan is so much fun to watch. Buster Keaton's a great big influence on him. Billy Friedkin, I don't know, his name's William Friedkin, but I like to call him Billy Friedkin. He once said that he's really happy that he never saw, when he was making The French Connection, he never saw the films of Buster Keaton or the chase scenes of Buster Keaton, because if he had, then he would not even have attempted to make anything. He would not have attempted to make a good chase scene because he thought, there's no way you can top that. There's no way you can top the chase scene in Cops, for example, or Sherlock Jr., that they're just amazing. And again, I would agree with him that it's amazing how cinema's been around for, over 100 years at this point, but in reality, since sound has come into films, they haven't gotten better, really. They've gotten more elaborate, is what's happened. Film has gotten more elaborate with sound and with color and digital cameras and every single advancement that's happened in movies. More stuff has been put into movies because you can now put more stuff in it. But at the end of the day, they haven't gotten better. They haven't gotten funnier. They haven't gotten more intimate. They haven't gotten more revelatory or closer to the human heart. At the end of the day, the best movies from the silent era are still the best movies ever made, or at least as good as anything that's considered the greatest film today. And I'm pretty sure most great film directors would agree with that. I feel like they would. In the vein of the comedy, Bogdanovich thinks at least as much. Bogdanovich is a big fan of Keaton, obviously, more than Chaplin. He says Chaplin's too sentimental, which I find that amusing, considering that John Ford's pretty sentimental too. I don't know, splitting hairs there. I think Bogdanovich, but Pedro, if I met him, I'd call him Pedro. But he does, he believes the same thing, that the best comedies were the silent ones, with the exception of maybe the screwball comedies. He's very fond of those, obviously, because he makes a lot of screwball comedies, or he has made. But it's funny that speaking of Bogdanovich, because speaking of Buster Keaton, speaking of Bogdanovich, speaking of comedies, Bogdanovich is also, anyone who knows enough about Bogdanovich knows that he's actually very close to two directors who work today in the industry. Their names being, of course, Wes Anderson and Noah Baumbach. They're very close. And recently, Noah Baumbach specifically released the latest film of his. The latest film of his. The Meyerowitz Stories, New and... Or is it New and Selected? Or something like that. The full title is something like that. And I watched it. And I actually think it's a great movie. Anyone who hasn't seen it, I'd recommend to go and watch it. It's a film about a family dynamic. You have a patriarch and his children, 3 siblings, who are all adults at this point, middle-aged. The patriarch is played by Dustin Hoffman. And I don't know the name of the sister, because it's 2 brothers and a sister. I know her, but I don't know her name, which I feel bad about. But everyone knows the 2 brothers, because it's Ben Stiller and Adam Sandler. 2 big names in movies and comedies, and just movies in general. Everyone knows Ben Stiller and Adam Sandler. They're 2 big names. And it's just... The movie is just a fucking barrel of laughs, but like laughs that kind of leave you with splinters almost, because it's so brutal. I will say this about Noah Baumbach. I think there's a very clear delineation between Baumbach pre-Greta Gerwig and post-Greta Gerwig, in the sense that, and maybe there are some exceptions, The Squid and the Whale might be an exception to this, but for the most part, his earlier films, it feels like he doesn't hate the characters. I don't think it's possible to really hate characters, you're right, but he has a certain kind of vindictiveness towards the subjects in his early movies, where it just feels like, oh, these are such miserable people, and this is such in this all miserable situation. And it's still funny, but it's funny in a very kind of dark way. Whereas, starting with Francis Ha, and everything that he's made up to that point, which is just 4 films really, Francis Ha, Mistress America, While We're Young, and this movie, it feels like that kind of really sour, dark mood has kind of taken a backseat to just straight comedy. And I'm sure if you were to ask Noah how he feels about his movies, he probably thinks that they're all comedies for the most part. He doesn't really think about them in terms of... they're comedies, but they're supposed to be like, dramas at the same time. No, he probably just sees them as comedies, and all the other stuff just kind of comes out of his personality and his life experiences. But The Meyerowitz Stories is a really good movie. I'm sure by the time I've put this online, Tommy will have seen it. If he hasn't, I'd be shocked and appalled. I would tell him not to watch this. Don't listen to this if you haven't already seen the movie. It's a protest. Like McEnroy. McEnroy. Actually, I wasn't really sure whom they were referring to at first when they said my protest like McEnroy, and I thought, the tennis player? I was like, what? Why are they the tennis player? Why are they talking about the tennis player? But anyway, it's got the best qualities of a good Noah Baumbach feature. Without Nicolas Cage. It's got sharp, biting dialogue, and it's got all these wonderful scenes that are just endlessly funny and well played out. It's something I did appreciate for the first time about Noah Baumbach watching this movie. And I kind of got it in Mistress America too, where Noah is a filmmaker who tries very hard to be a filmmaker. In the truest sense of the word. He doesn't... there are some filmmakers who could be making the kinds of movies that Noah makes, where they're about family dynamics and interpersonal relationships, and they're not really big in any sense. They're intimate in terms of the scope for the most part. And because of that, people who make those kinds of movies may not feel that they need to be very proficient or advanced in their technique in terms of how they stage things, and because there's no need. But I say this because I've seen a lot of independent cinema that's really crappy, where it's always the same stories about a father and a son, or a mother and a husband and a wife, and it's a very intimate movie, and there's very few characters, and it's just, ugh, why is this all so boring? But Noah legitimately tries to make good movies using film techniques. Like, he tries to be a filmmaker. And again, I guess the praise I would give him is that it doesn't feel like he's trying to do that, because his films tend to be just smooth going. But he does do it when you realize that, oh no, he's trying to do things here, and there's a method to these things, and it's you appreciate it in a way, because and I've heard Noah talk about it too in interviews, where he says people often tell me that they often ask me if stuff in my movie is improvised, and he always gets insulted by it. He always gets insulted by people saying it feels like it was improvised, because he says, you know, I wrote the damn thing, and I worked really hard to make the movie, and you're telling me the actors just came up with it on the fucking spot. I found that very funny, hearing him say that. Basically get frustrated with the idea that people think his movies are improvised. I thought that was very amusing. But again, it wasn't until watching this movie that I realized, oh, this is a movie with many moving parts, and Noah Baumbach is trying to make a movie. In the same interview, he talked about how he thought of the films of Lubitsch and Max Ophuls, and I remember just hearing this and thinking, you know what, I can kind of see what he's going for. I can see that. But at the same time, I appreciate how distinct it is from that. I'm sure Tommy, once he hears it, he'll be thinking, oh my God, I got through him. I got through to him. I'm sure if there's one thing that Tommy takes pride in knowing is that he's influenced me in some ways. He's introduced me to many things that have made me a different man. He introduced me to Whit Stillman in the films of Metropolitan and Barcelona. I've yet to see The Last Days of Disco, and I refuse to see it until Tommy Mitchell's around. I will not watch that movie until Tommy Mitchell is in the vicinity. I did see that Jane Austen film he did. Was it a Jane Austen movie? I feel like it was. I forget what it was called, but it wasn't very good. It was okay. Probably the worst Whit Stillman film I've seen. Not that there are many, but anyway. This is a funny movie. But because of him, I've seen Whit Stillman movies. Because of him, I've got into more Noah Baumbach. And because of him, probably the biggest contribution he's made to my life is Bob Dylan. This is the We Love Tommy Mitchell hour now, since Isaac Carlson's gone. And I do feel at this point in my life like at the end of Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, where Sam and Frodo are off on that fucking canoe, and the other hobbits have been taken by the Uruk-hai, and Boromir has been killed, and it's like Gimli and Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir to the throne of Isildur. You have to say the whole thing when you say his name. And Orlando Elfbloom, I forget his name. Legolas, I'm pretty sure. They're the only ones left, and like, oh, it looks like the Fellowship has been broken. You know, that's what it feels like. If that's what I feel like where I am in my life, I feel like everyone's gone off into different directions. And these are the people whom I made the clear mistake of investing my time and friendship into, because I thought it would lead to us all working on things together. When clearly it has not. You know, Isaac, I need not say more about Isaac. I've already said enough. He's it's not that he's unreliable, it's just that he has other priorities that prevent him from being what I need him to be. Tommy is not within a 100-mile radius of me even, so he cannot be of any assistance. Alan, who was the other person that we became close friends with at Columbia, his life is a mess right now, so he can't really afford to help anyone, if not at first himself. And so here I am, just sitting around thinking, I just want to make stuff, but no one is around who can help me make stuff. I'm going to have to find a way to do it myself, but it's just bullshit. It's just fucking bullshit that this happened. It's like there's an alternate reality where we're all still together and we're actually working on stuff and it's leading to things. And that's the better version of my life at this moment. It's really sad. I know it sounds like I'm pitying myself. I'm just fully on the self-pity thing. But, it's just... I guess that part of it I got from the Kazan book, too, is that, you never really get what you want out of life, but you try the best you can with what you've got. And I'm trying the best I can with what I've got. And I'm not succeeding very well. Something's got to give, I feel, and who knows? I'm still, I hate to say this out loud, but I still am like, I haven't gone to a voodoo witch doctor yet, but I feel like any day now I might just say, can you there's this guy named Tommy, he wants to go to New York. Can you make it impossible for him to go to New York? Can you you know what I mean? Can you cause another 9/11 or something? Get rid of that other tower that's there. I don't care how you do it. Just make it so that he doesn't want to live in New York anymore. Or something like that, Maybe his house burns down, and so he's the only surviving member of his clan, and so he's forced to move back to Chicago. I feel like I'm going to go to a witch doctor any day now and just tell them, hey, can you, do any of those things I just said? And then the guy is going to be like, oh, yeah, well, that's fine, but you're going to have to sell me your soul. And I'm like, oh, that's fine. I haven't been making any use of it anyway. I'm not a big fan of my soul. Just take it. I just want Tommy. Take my soul. I just want Tommy. That's the title of my next hit song. Take my soul. I just want Tommy Mitchell. But on a lighter note, Tommy did introduce me to Bob Dylan. And I'm a big fan of Bob Dylan music now, much more than I used to be. I'm going through his bootleg series of albums right now, and let me tell you, it's rewarding. It's a rewarding experience listening to that music because it's just, none of it sucks. Some of it is music that he's done before, but different variation of the music he's known for. Maybe a different orchestration. Actually, on a side note of what we just saw, this is a moment where it's really fucking windy, and the hospital that he was just in, the facade just blew away. And anyone who's watching this may be thinking, well, how the hell did they do that? And I know for a fact that the way they did it is actually really simple, where they built the facade of the hospital on a kind of a machine, not a crane, but something like that. And so they essentially just pulled on it and lifted up the facade of the hospital so that it looked like it blew away. And then you saw Buster underneath it. It's just, that's something else I love about these movies, is that it's so simple it seems obvious, but at the same time it requires so much guts and courage, and it requires so much in the way of just physical craftsmanship and innovation, because no one had done it before. So no one knew how to do it. And here comes that famous shot that everyone knows from Keaton. And boop, there goes the house facade on top of him. And anyone who's wondering, well, how did they do that? That's much simpler. They literally just did it. They built the house, and they built the facade separately, and they had it topple over on Keaton. And they had Keaton stand in a very precise spot. Because that facade literally weighed more than a ton. So if they did not have him in the exact right mark, then he would have died. He would have just been fucking crushed by the front end of a house. It's all just amazing. It really is just physical endurance in Buster Keaton's films. It reminds me, actually, thinking of Buster Keaton now and thinking of Jackie Chan, it reminds me how at our there was a time in Colombia when I was still in Colombia and Tommy was still in Colombia where we would watch Jackie Chan movies together. I hadn't seen a lot of these movies. I had not actually seen it for the first time. The first time I ever saw Police Story was with Tommy. The first time I ever saw Project A was with Tommy, and I'll talk more about that some other time because those are probably the most romantic experiences of my time at Columbia. No real romances to speak of, which isn't to say that I was celibate, but it is to say that there was nothing that was more significant emotionally to me than the time I spent with Tommy Mitchell. My hope, obviously, is that he hears this and just feels terribly, terribly bad about how he's ruined my life. He's like a lover. He's like a lover I was with, a very important lover. And he's gone now, and he's just left me wrecked with a baby. And, there's no other words I can say about that, really. But he got me into Bob Dylan, and similarly, in a similar fashion, lately, I've been listening to Billy Joel. And the reason I've been listening to Billy Joel is because Isaac Carlson, there's his name again, is a big fan of Billy Joel. And I've listened to every single one of Billy Joel's albums at this point. Well, I've listened to all of Bob Dylan's albums too, but now I'm just going through the process of re-listening to them all and really paying attention to the lyrics and really getting into the music. And this is something I do whenever I want to get into a musician. I do the same thing with filmmakers for the most part, where whenever I want to get into a specific filmmaker or musician, I'll take all of their albums and I'll listen to them in chronological order. All of them. Doesn't matter how many they are. Same with filmmakers. I did that with Peckinpah, I did it with Orson Welles. And here's the reverse end of the hospital facade now, coming back down on him. Same trick. But it's about to go back up again, I bet. Is it about to go back up? Oh, I guess it's not. But anyway, oh no, now it's just gonna now it's actually just gonna break. That's great. That's wonderful. But I did it with Bob Dylan. I did it with David Bowie, with Prince, with a bunch of people. And now I did it with Billy Joel. Billy Joel was actually very easy to do because he doesn't have that many albums. Not really, compared to some of the other people I just mentioned. I can probably count them now if I wanted to. Let me think. The first one was Cold Spring Harbor, which is actually his best album. It's his first one. But most people have never heard that album. And maybe just a few songs from it they know, just because later on, a song like She's Got Away was re-released on a live recording album called a live album. Whatever they're called. They're called live albums. Called Songs from the Attic. So that one was re-released and became a hit after the fact. But Cold Spring Harbor, then followed by the Piano Man was the second one. And then the third one, which was I think it was Street Life Serenade, and then after that it was Turnstiles. And then after that it was The Stranger, followed by 52nd Street, or was it 57th Street? 50-something Street. And then that was followed by Glass Houses, An Innocent Man, or was An Innocent Man, yeah. Was An Innocent Man after the Nylon Curtain or before? Well, then also came the Nylon Curtain. And then there was the Stormfront, The Bridge, and River of Happiness, or River of Dreams. So that's what? 12 albums in total I just mentioned? That's how many albums he's done, which is, again, not that many compared to other people. It's especially when you think the fact that Billy Joel has never stopped touring. He's been touring ever since, since he's had a career, he's been touring, so he never stopped. But he stopped making original music around 93. He's just been touring off of that music for the last 20 or so years. 25 years at this point. And he has not felt the need to record any original music, which is kind of amazing when you think about it, that he hasn't needed to do that. But I will say that's probably the great contribution that Isaac Carlson has made to my life, more than anything else, is Billy Joel, and appreciation for Billy Joel that I did not used to have. So Tommy and Isaac have both imparted some taste on me. Alan Marshall, not so much. It's weird how Alan's the oldest of all of us, and yet I feel like he's gotten more taste from Tommy and I than the other way around, which is really kind of amazing. That's how it turned out. You'd think it wouldn't be that way, but I feel like it has, which I find endlessly fascinating, the dynamic in that sense. But this movie is almost over, right? Thank God you don't have to keep listening to me for too long. It's like 4 minutes left in this movie, and let me tell you, they're great. These last 4 minutes, so much stuff that was callbacks to other jokes early in the film, and it's just a really great harrowing scene, but also still funny. Buster Keaton was really, he's really good. He's really good. If I could be like anyone, I'd like to be like Buster. Well, it certainly isn't Buster. If I can make movies like Buster Keaton, that'd be even better. But everyone agrees. Everyone in the history of cinema agrees. Buster Keaton's the funniest man who ever lived. Actually, I recently saw an interview with John Waters, which actually he brought up Elia Kazan in a funny way, because he did an interview with Isabelle Huppert, and Isabelle Huppert talked about how she and John Waters both like the film Wanda by Barbara Loden, who was Kazan's second wife, and how Isabelle Huppert she met Kazan, and he was a very old, grumpy man. And how, but how Kazan in general did not think highly of Wanda, and didn't really think, even though in the book he's actually is pretty generous when it comes to that film. He doesn't say anything really that bad about it. It's really, so I don't know, maybe it was just different in public, who knows. She caught him at a bad day, but, so yeah, John Waters and Isabelle Huppert, I know for a fact, both love Barbara Loden's film Wanda. And why was I talking about that? I'm sure there was a reason for it, but I can't recall for the life of me what it was. Barbara Loden, John Waters, Isabelle Huppert. Well, John Waters was talking about how, a comedy should never be longer than like an hour and a half. It should never be more than 2 hours. Like, comedies cannot be long. Which instantly made me thought of, well, what about It's a Mad, 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 Mad World? To which I thought, well, that film is a bit long. And really, you don't have to watch it all together all the way through. You can just watch it in like segments, and it's just as good. The length may be a detriment, but it's probably the only epic comedy that's ever been made that I can think of. And it also features a cameo by Buster Keaton. So hey, look, I guess there was a reason why I brought it up. Okay, so here comes Buster Keaton about to do a swan dive. And boom! That's just like, really, if I had nothing to talk about, all I would do would be to just say, oh, look at that stunt. That's amazing. Oh, look at that stunt. That's amazing. Buster Keaton's kind of an amazing person. Well, all right. This is pretty much over. So I guess I'll be saying goodbye to you now. But hopefully the next episode will have Isaac. I plan on, a future plan of mine is just to record some episodes in advance of me doing solo. Trying my damnedest to keep you entertained, but usually preferably with films this short. I'll record some in advance just in case I get another text from Isaac on a Monday saying, oh, can't do the podcast this week, Fabricio. Well, that's nice. But hopefully the next one will be with Isaac. I just realized this episode will come out on Halloween, so happy Halloween, I guess. Or it'll be the one closest to Halloween, so. This movie is nothing at all related to Halloween, so. I lived up to that promise, at least. But yeah. Have a good one, everyone, which pretty much means Tommy. This has been Background Noise with Fabricio Barral. And this has been Steamboat Bill Jr. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a good one.